We just stepped on their face with a hobnail boot and broke their nose. We just crushed their face.
What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Glory UGA podcast, brought to you by our great friends at Alumni Hall. And just when you thought that we were done talking about Jared Curtis, you were wrong. We've got more Jared Curtis talk for you guys today, but we're going to do it from a different angle. Because now that we have officially landed the number one quarterback in the 2026 class, fans have turned their attention to, well, how good is this guy? Is the hype real? And specifically, how does he compare to other Georgia quarterbacks and Georgia recruiting targets in recent years? And that is the question, guys. That's the question I've gotten in various forms more than a couple of times since Curtis made his official decision on Monday. And I thought it was an interesting question. So I'm going to break it down today by going back and looking at every single recruiting class since Kirby Smart took the job in 2016. We're going to look at the entire Kirby Smart era and look at all the quarterbacks that Georgia landed in that time frame, and also some selected other five-star targets at that position that are, I think, comparable to at least the recruiting profile that Jared Curtis brings to the table as the number one quarterback in the country. So that's what we're going to do today, guys. I know more Curtis talk, but we're going to do this from a very different angle. And a lot of you have reached out with questions about this, so I figured why not? Let's jump on and do this today. So before we get there, I do want to make sure everyone remembers, if you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to this channel right now. This channel, you guys know by now, it is for all you diehard Georgia fans out there. We produce content for you guys. You are the target audience. So go ahead if you haven't already. If you like this content, subscribe right now. Subscribe, like, comment, get that conversation started. This is one of those topics, guys. A lot of you are probably going to have some disagreements with me on some of these quarterbacks, and that's okay. I love the conversation, and if you throw a comment out there, I will do my very best to respond to that and get that conversation going. So yeah, help me out there. Greatly appreciate you guys, and check out our podcast on Apple, Spotify, wherever, for 4 episodes of our show. But all right, let's go ahead, guys, and dive into this. We're going to go all the way back to 2016. Let's rewind the clocks, right? It feels like that was eons ago now at this point, but hey, I guess it's about a decade ago. So 2016, we know at the end of the Mark Richt era, the guy that he was recruiting at the quarterback position from all the way across the country in the state of Washington was supposed to be the quarterback of the future, right? Maybe he was going to be that guy that saved Mark Richt's job. If he could just get through the 2015 season, you got this guy coming in, and maybe that can take our program to the next level and win that elusive national title. Well, that guy, if you remember, was Jacob Eason. I don't want to say the first all-everything quarterback that Georgia recruited. You got Matthew Stafford back in 2006, right? DJ Shockley was a pretty big high school recruit. Aaron Murray was a big high school recruit back in the day too, in the Richt era. But Jacob Eason was that guy that Kirby Smart was able to keep in the fold. He was already committed before we made the move to move on from Mark Richt and hire Kirby Smart. And so Kirby, if you remember, the first day he got the job, he takes the private jet out to Washington, meets with Eason and his dad, and obviously closes the deal and is able to keep Eason in the fold. And that was Kirby's first huge recruiting win for Georgia as our head coach. So Eason, number 4 player overall and the number 2 quarterback in the country according to the 247 composite. Today I'm using 247 composite. Usually I use the On3 industry rankings. I like that. It's this virtually the same thing, but On3 wasn't doing rankings back then. It wasn't in existence. So we'll use 247 today. So number 4, number 2 for Eason. And guys, Eason was legit. I know it didn't turn out the way that he wanted it to, that we all thought it would with Jacob Eason, but if you go back and watch that tape, I remember watching this guy's tape back in the day, and I was mesmerized. We hadn't recruited a quarterback like that, I guess since Stafford. It's been about a decade prior to that. And I actually went back in preparation for this show and rewatched the tape of all these guys, all their high school tapes. So Eason, Fromm, Fields, all these guys we're going to talk about today. I went back and pulled the tape for their high school days. That's what I'm trying to do here, guys. I'm trying to compare them as high school prospects, where they were coming out of high school, going to college. That's all what we have with Jared Curtis. We don't know what Jared Curtis is going to turn out to be, but we're trying to project that. So I'm going back and watching what these guys were in high school. And I think we have to remember, guys, Jacob Eason was awesome coming out of high school. He looked the part, tall, lanky, but tall. Was a decent athlete, didn't move incredibly well in the pocket, but well enough, had that just absolute cannon attached to his torso. And the guy just effortlessly was put balls out there in high school. He was playing in Washington high school football, so it's not the highest level football, but still hitting guys on the field, throwing the ball with ease, effortless arm talent. So the things I said about Curtis earlier this week with an effortless arm strength. Very much the same thing with Jacob Eason. And one of the questions I've gotten specifically is like Eason and Curtis, right? So their arm strength is very similar. Somebody's asking like, who has the better arm? Similar coming out of high school. Eason, it's hard to say. The tape we're watching of Jared Curtis right now, I mentioned this earlier in the week, it's sophomore tape, guys. And to me, it's really impressive that this guy looks as good as he does as a sophomore. And so I'm very excited to see where he is as a senior this year. I'm going to be watching his tape, or be watching full games if they have it on NFHS. I'll do my very best there. But as a sophomore, I think we can say at the very least it's comparable. The arm talent, the arm strength was very comparable to what Eason was showing as a senior in high school. Where Curtis has the edge is athleticism. Eason wasn't a statue. I think sometimes people like remember him that way. He wasn't a statue. But he wasn't the most athletic guy back there. He wasn't a guy you were going to do design QB run stuff with like I think you can with Jared Curtis. He was certainly not a creator back there. He did not really have strong improvisational skills like Jared Curtis does. He wasn't throwing off platform the way that Jared Curtis does. The different arm angles, you didn't see that as much from Jacob Eason. But in terms of like putting the ball on the money, good ball placement coming out of high school, incredible arm strength. It was that physical tool there was what made him elite. And you thought, okay, well, we come into our system, got Mark Rickson's really good job quarterback, so when he was at Florida State. He'll develop, he'll be that next guy for Georgia. It didn't quite work out that way, but I think there's some similarities there, but I do think that coming out of high school, Jared Curtis is a better high school prospect. Again, part of this because like the high school tape is comparable to what you saw from Eason as a senior. I think he's more athletic. I think he can do some of the things that you expect quarterbacks to do and what teams want quarterbacks to do in modern football, which is be able to create outside the pocket, have those improvisational skills, which Eason just didn't really have. He wasn't a creator, wasn't an improv guy, wasn't a guy throwing off platform, those kind of things. So I would give Curtis an edge, not a massive edge, but an edge over Eason coming out of high school. And we'll see. Like the thing that got Eason at the college level wasn't so much the physical tools. The physical tools were always there. They were always there. I know we lost that game. Was it it was 2016, right? I know we lost that game in Tennessee. I don't want to bring that up. It sucks. But remember the throw he made to give us the lead before the Josh Dobbs Hail Mary? You remember that throw? That was one of the best throws that I'd ever seen from a Georgia quarterback at the time. I mean, that was a freaking frozen rope. So the physical tools were there. What got Eason was like the nuances of playing the position, like diagnosing coverages, going through progressions, decision making. That's kind of what got him. And that's what we still have to find out about Jared Curtis. We don't fully know that yet. We'll find out. But in terms of like where he is physically coming out of high school, I would still give Jared Curtis a little bit of an edge there over Jacob Eason. 2017, Jake Fromm. Look, I love, once upon a time, I've been doing this podcast for going on 11 years now, guys. Been on YouTube for less than a year. So we're new to YouTube, but we been around for a long time doing this podcast. And those of you who have been with us for the entirety of the podcast, and I know you guys are out there. We love you guys. You remember, you're probably critical of me at times. Once upon a time, not only was I a card-carrying member of the Jake Fromm fan club, I was the president of the Jake Fromm fan club. I loved Jake Fromm. I thought he was an awesome college quarterback for Georgia. I know 2019 did not go great for him. A lot of that was injuries. We didn't have players at the wide receiver position. Was there some regression there? Yeah, sure, but there was context there. I think Jake was still Jake, and I think he lost some confidence that year. But 2018, made no mistake about it, Jake Fromm was freaking awesome for Georgia. Like he was playing at a national championship caliber for us in 2018, and as a true freshman in 2017, who wasn't even the starter in the preseason, had to come in cold off the bench in relief of Jacob Eason and hold him off. Right? He was great for us and got us to the national championship game. Now, did we lean on him as much in 2017? No, we leaned a lot more on him in 2018. So I think Jake Fromm was an awesome college quarterback, and I will fight people to the death on that. All right, But if we're projecting what Jake was coming to high school at Houston County and where Jared Curtis is now, Jake was prolific at Houston County. He threw the ball a ton, right? Was putting up massive numbers week in and week out. And this guy never had the strongest arm. The physical tools are nowhere near the physical tools that Jared Curtis is operating with. So if you're trying to compare them, different ball game and physical tools. But that was never what made Jake Fromm a really good quarterback. I don't know if I can say Jake was elite. He was kind of elite in 2018, all right? And I know we'll get to Justin Fields here in a minute. I know we still have the Justin Fields lovers out there and the Fromm haters, and I do not want to go down that rabbit hole again. We've moved past that. But Jake Fromm was really good. I know people wanted Fields to take over the job. Like, would he have done better than Jake Fromm in 2018? Absolutely not. No way in 2018. Maybe in the future, if you're trying to play the long game, maybe. And I think if Fields would have stayed, he might have won the job in 2019, maybe. But 2018, Jake was really good. But the physical tools just weren't there. He had great ball placement. What made Jake really strong as a quarterback was all the nuances, the little things. Maybe Eason wasn't great, because how was Fromm able to hold Eason off? Well, he was better at the little things quarterbacks do, diagnosing coverages, decision-making, those kind of things. Whereas Eason had the physical tools, but just didn't know how to play quarterback the way that Jake Fromm did. But again, that's hard to know right now with Jared Curtis, because you're playing in like they're like the equivalent of single A private here in Georgia, in Tennessee, and we have sophomore tape to work with. We just don't really know that. Now, what you see on tape in the highlights is he does seem to be making mostly good decisions. There time to time he'll get under pressure and he'll just go like all Johnny Manziel and just throw the ball up, and it's a prayer and it works out for him because he's playing single A private. But I would say Fromm was more polished as a quarterback coming out of high school in terms of like knowing how to play the position, the nuances, the little things, right? He just had nowhere near the physical tools that Jared Curtis has. And I will also say, again, Jared Curtis sophomore tape, like I think Fromm is more polished coming out of high school. It's not a massive gap. I think that Curtis is a very polished guy. If you look at what his sophomore tape shows you, you imagine what his junior tape was. And guys, I got a question earlier this week, like why does he not have junior tape out there? Well, it's a pretty simple answer. When you are Jared Curtis, the number one quarterback in the country, you don't need to put junior tape out there. The tape, the name of the game, the reason why people put tape out there, like sure, now some guys just put tape out there to show off, right? It's just like it's a flex thing, right? That's what they're doing. But really, the idea behind it is you put tape out there to get your name out there, to gain the attention of schools and coaches so that you earn offers. Well, when you're the number one quarterback in the country and you can have your pick of schools, you don't need to put together the tape, which takes a little bit of time. Usually have coaches do it for you, but that's why I would imagine why there's not junior tape out there right now. But I think that Fromm is more polished, not by leaps and bounds though. And if you factor in like how the physical tools that Curtis has, like yeah, he's obviously a better prospect coming out of high school than Jake Fromm was. Now, 2018, Justin Fields, the last time Georgia landed a number one quarterback, the number two overall prospect in that 2018 class, number one quarterback. Obviously, if you remember, we were recruiting Fields, we were recruiting Trevor Lawrence, right? Same class. We ended up getting Fields. And I remember I was driving, I was on the way to one of their games. My wife was driving to one of our road games. I forget which game it was. It was in the fall. And I was watching on my phone in the passenger seat. I'm a passenger princess. She's great. Awesome. Love her. But I was watching it and I got really excited because I've still wanted a dual threat quarterback. And Curtis is kind of somewhat of that for us. But I was over the moon when we landed Justin Fields. Obviously, again, that didn't work out. He didn't win the job immediately in 2018. And again, don't want to go down that hole too much, but he transfers out. Like we know that story, but coming out of high school, Justin Fields was a supreme athlete, a better athlete than Jared Curtis is. Curtis is a really good athlete, especially considering his size, like 6'4", 235, 240. But Fields is a different level athlete in terms of like his speed, athleticism, all of that. But I do think that, at least on tape, and I think part of it is like quarterbacks work on this stuff now. They weren't working on it as much in 2018, like actual improvisational stuff, the throwing off platform. Like quarterbacks, when they go through drills, they work on that stuff now. So Fields wasn't as good like in terms of like improvising and creating and like throwing off platform because he wasn't working on that as much. That's something that clearly, in my opinion, Jared Curtis has worked a lot on. It's the Patrick Mahomes effect. That's really what it is. Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen effect, like those guys, Kyler Murray, those guys. This is the improvisational skills, those guys, and what teams are looking for that when things break down. So Fields was certainly faster, a better overall athlete. I don't think he was quite as good off platform. His release wasn't as quick. He was certainly not as accurate. Arm strength was really good. Justin Fields always has had a really good arm. Comparable. It's hard to measure those things, right? You see one say they both throw a really strong football. They throw some frozen ropes out there. So I think arm strength was comparable. I do think that Jared Curtis is a more polished passer in terms of like being able to fit balls into tight spaces and like layering footballs. His ball placement is out of control. The touch he can put on balls, where he can place it. Justin Fields just didn't really have that coming out of high school, and it's one of those things that got him at the college level. Always a supreme athlete, and he leaned on that a lot, but there's also a reason why he's never quite fully panned out at the NFL level, because there are some holes in his game that were very obvious when you saw him come out of high school. You saw, well, he's a supreme athlete, and he can develop those things. Well, he's just never quite fully developed in all those categories. So I would still say, as great as Fields was, and I know he was the number one quarterback, number two overall prospect, I think Jared Curtis, and again, same thing as I was saying earlier, comparing like Fields' senior tape to Curtis's sophomore tape, it's very close, right? So I would give Curtis the slight edge there over Justin Fields. I know some people disagree with me because I know we have some Justin Fields lovers out there, and that's cool. Like, you have your guys, everybody has their guy, that's fine. But I would give Curtis a slight edge over Justin Fields as well. Then you go to the 2020 year, Carson Beck. Carson Beck was an interesting prospect, right? So, his junior year of high school was his first year actually like starting, like playing any real football. Moved to Mandarin High School. They won the state championship. I think it was their first state championship ever. It was a school that was traditionally not good, and he came in there and led them to a state championship. He balled out in the state championship. So that got him on people's radars, and we were able to get him and get him in the fold. His senior year though, if you remember, Carson Beck had a bad senior year of high school. I mean, he completed under 50% of his passes. It was like a little over 48% of his passes as a senior in high school, went through for 167 yards a game. And a big part of that was like he was still very much in the development stage. Like, this guy was the big time baseball player before he started playing football. He really kind of turned it on to football like late sophomore into his junior year. And so he just wasn't close to as polished as really a lot of these guys in this list. And certainly Jared Curtis never had the physical tools, had some good physical tools, was never the athlete of Curtis, was never certainly not the creator, nowhere near the creator of Jared Curtis, like not even the same stratosphere. Didn't have the same arm, good arm, not the same level of arm. His ability to layer footballs, that's not something he was doing a lot out of high school. He learned, he set and developed and got better at that. Was never a great deep ball passer. You saw that at Georgia. He never really got great at that. He got better marginally last year, but 2023, we know like that was one of the big issues he had at times. He was really good for us in 2023, but that was one. You had some balls out there, guys open down the field, and you just miss them. Right, you miss them, or even if you hit them, like they have to stop, and it could be a touchdown. And it's a big 40-yard gain, but it could have been a touchdown. Right, you had some of those against Tennessee in 2023 when you're actually I guess it was Tennessee, and then it could have been big plays, but you complete the pass, but you don't get the touchdown because you force your receiver to stop and come back and catch the football. Right, so Carson Beck was a good prospect, but he was still earlier in his development. Curtis, clearly a better prospect coming out of high school, in my opinion. Will be as good as Carson was back in 2023 at any point in his career. Time will tell. Time will tell. But again, I'm trying to compare them coming out of high school, and right now, Curtis is just far more advanced than Beck was coming out of high school. That's why Beck had to sit for 3 years. Then 2021, brought Vandegrift, who we know transferred out and now has just retired from football. So it's easy to look back and say, well, this guy wasn't that good coming out of high school. But Vandegrift was a good prospect. Similar, we talked about this a little bit earlier in the week, similar to Jared Curtis. He played at a small school. He played at Prince Avenue Christian. That's not too far from where I live here in Athens. And that's single A private. It's not high-level football. I mean, his best receiver, Logan, what was his name? Logan something, right? Was about yay tall, fast, jitterbug, twitchy, awesome, really good player, but was not big, right? But that's okay. A lot of the guys you're going against defensively, they're not big either, so it all kind of averages out there. Vandegrift in high school was a really good athlete, okay? If you remember, I liked Vandegrift. I said that on this show, but I would never wax poetic about him the way that I have about Jared Curtis here over the past week or so. Because Vandegrift was a really good athlete. He was a strong runner, powerful runner, really fast, and he's certainly still faster than Jared Curtis. Curtis is a good athlete, and I think he's a different kind of athlete than Vandegrift. He's bigger. He's like 240 pounds. He's good 20-ish pounds bigger than Vandegrift, but he's not as fast. In a straight line, Vandegrift would beat him in a race, 100%. But Vandegrift was never a really great passer at the high school level. Could he hit a guy that was wide open? Because it happens sometimes in single A private. Yeah. But his throwing motion, even in college, it always kind of, I was like, oh, it's just ugly, man. It was just not a fluid throwing motion. It was very much like kind of like over the top. Not a quick release at all. And he just was like, he was a good athlete, fast, but there's like a stiffness to Vandegrift's game that Curtis does not have. He's got some twitch in his game. He's bigger. He is even he's not as fast. I do think he's better with the improvisational stuff than Vandegrift was, and he's clearly a more polished passer than Vandegrift was. Not even close. So I know Vandegrift once upon a time was committed to Oklahoma. Was a big 5-star guy at one time. He kind of came back down to earth a little bit as that class progressed, that cycle progressed. He ended up being the number 34 player overall, number 5 quarterback in the 247 composite rating. So really good prospect, but in my opinion, it's pretty clear. I don't think it's really close. Jared Curtis is a much better prospect. Vandegrift was a good quarterback prospect, but Curtis is a better quarterback prospect coming out of high school. Then in 2022, you got Gunnar Stockton, who was the number 110 player overall, number 7 quarterback in that class. At one point earlier in his high school career, he was a 5-star guy. He was committed to South Carolina, decommitted, comes to Georgia, right? But as that cycle went on, other guys rose to the quarterback position. He kind of fell back a little bit in terms of the rankings. But here's what I would say with Gunnar. Physically speaking, it's not a ball game. Okay, Gunner 6'1", 210. Jared Curtis is like 6'4", 235, 240. Okay, and Curtis in that much bigger frame is a better athlete in my opinion than Gunner Stockton. And look, guys, I love Gunner, and I want really good things to happen from Gunner. I'm really excited about what Gunner can do for us this year. I say it because I know there's a lot of Gunner stands out there, and if I say anything that's not like absolutely glowing and saying that Gunner is the best quarterback in the history of the world, people come for me. Okay, so I want to make this clear. I like Gunner. I think Gunner's really good, but if we're being objective, physically speaking, from a tool standpoint, it's apples and oranges. Okay, Gunner has a good arm. He does not have a Jared Curtis arm. Gunner's a good athlete. He's not a Jared Curtis athlete. Gunner can create some outside the pocket, but he can't create the way that Jared Curtis does, right? He doesn't have that twitchiness. He can throw off platform some, sure, but not the way that Jared Curtis does. He can use different arm angles at times, sure, but not like Jared Curtis does. So that's not to say that Gunner's not going to be awesome for this year. I think Gunner's going to have a really good season for Georgia, and I fully expect him to have a good year and to come back in 2026 and be our guy in 2026. But if they were both coming out of high school the same year, Jared Curtis would unequivocally be a higher rated player than Gunner Stockton. Now, you got to also go out there and do it and know how to play the quarterback position. As I've said, we got to see that from Jared Curtis. And Gunner's grown a lot. Yeah, I've seen Gunner quite a bit going to G-Days, going to fall camp practices, going to coaches' clinics practices over the years and seen his development. And early in his career, like there were some questions I had, but he's gotten better and better and better and better every time I've seen him. But he's had the benefit of being in the system. Coming out of high school, we know that how prolific Gunner was, guys. I can read the comments now. Don't you know that Gunner Stockton has set the Georgia high school record for passing yards, total yards, touchdowns, total touchdowns, all the whole 9 yards, right? I know that, guys. Gunner was awesome, was prolific. I remember watching him and Brock Vandagriff go head-to-head, Rabun County and Prince Avenue in Rabun County. I remember watching that game on TV. It was freaking awesome. But if I'm projecting what they were out of high school, Jared Curtis is a better prospect coming out of high school. How will they ultimately turn out down the road? Time will tell. Time will tell. But as prospects, it's clear to me Gunner Stockton was not quite the prospect that Jared Curtis is coming out of high school. Then you fast forward to 2023. We did not take a quarterback in 2023. We took a big swing and miss at Arch Manning, though. So I do want to mention Arch Manning. I know we did not ultimately land him, but that's another big-time five-star quarterback prospect that we almost had. Like, we were right there with Arch Manning. And he was, if you remember, Arch was number 1 overall in that 2023 class, number 1 quarterback. I still maintain to this day, Arch is good. Arch is going to be a good quarterback for Texas. But the number 1 player in that class, no way. No way. That was a name recognition thing. That was a branding thing. That's what that was. It was, hey, let's get attention for all these recruiting services out there. If we rank Arch being number 1, then people will look and it'll create all this hubbub and like we'll get attention, right? You'll get clicks. Okay, that's what they were doing. But Arch was a good high school prospect coming out of Newman High School. Arch is kind of like with Justin Fields. I would say if you lined up Arch Manning and Justin Fields and Jared Curtis, and you had those three run a 40-yard dash, Fields would finish first, Arch would finish second, Curtis would finish third. 100%. Curtis is fast. He's not as fast in a straight line as either of those guys. However, I would say there's more stiffness in Arch Manning's game, like in his overall bearing out there on the field than Jared Curtis. Curtis has got some twitch, guys. I know he's like 240 pounds. He's got some twitch in his game, okay? Like, he's got good hips out there. Arch doesn't quite have that twitch. He's a good athlete. He can get outside the pocket. He can create some. And you saw Texas last year. They had a package of him. They're using him with a design QB run game. Like, he can do that stuff. He's a really good athlete. It's just a different kind of athlete than Jared Curtis. And again, I keep coming back to this. I do think that Jared Curtis is better off platform with the improvisational stuff. It depends, like, what do you put an emphasis on, right? I think he has a quicker release than Arch. I think his release is more effortless. I think they both have really strong arms. I think Jared Curtis has a stronger arm. They both are accurate with the football coming out of high school. I think that Jared Curtis is better with his ball placement. So Arch is great. And I know a lot of you are sitting there saying, well, of course you're going to say Jared Curtis is better. You're a Georgia guy. You're on a Georgia podcast. You're just a homer. You can think that if you want. That's fine. But I would request before you go fire away in the comments that you go watch the tape. Go watch the tape. Watch Arch Manning's tape in high school, his senior tape, and then go watch Jared Curtis' senior tape. And that's the other thing, again, you're watching Arch's senior tape, you're watching Jared Curtis' sophomore tape. It's hard to make that comparison, right? It's tough. It's not quite apples to apples. But I go back to like the accuracy. Arch was accurate. I'm not saying he couldn't hit anything in high school, but there are a number of throws, like when guys are like open down the field, where he completes the pass. It's kind of like Carson Beck, but the receiver has to stop and come back to it. And what should have been a walk-in touchdown if you hit him in stride, it's still a big gain. It's a 40-yard gain, but it's not as big of a play as it could be. So his ball placement just isn't quite there. If you go watch Jared Curtis' tape, and I know there's guys running wide open at times because he's playing at a private school in Tennessee. I understand that. But what you can say, when those guys are running wide open, he is hitting them in stride, and they are just waltzing into the end zone. The ball placement is wild for Jared Curtis, and that's at an early stage of development. So Arch is awesome. We're splitting hairs here between Arch Manning and Jared Curtis coming out of high school. But for my money, it's a personal preference. What am I looking for? I want quarterbacks that can create when there's not much there. When things break down, right? You play really good teams, you gotta have good pass rushers coming against you. You've got to be able to throw off platform, change arm angles, create outside the pocket. I think Jared Curtis is better at those things, even though he might not be quite as fast in a straight line as Arch Manning. So I would give Curtis a slight edge over Arch Manning if they were coming out in the same class. And then 2024, Ryan Puglisi. That's the guy that we land out of Connecticut, number 143 overall, number 10 prospect, or number 10 quarterback prospect in the country. And you guys know I really like Ryan Puglisi. I said, going back to the beginning of spring practice, that, hey, you know what? Gunner's got an edge here, but physical tools, I think Puglisi's got better physical tools. It's going to be hard for him to make up for lost time. This is basically like his first real spring. He was here last year as an early enrollee, but he was hurt, so he didn't really do much. So I didn't really expect him to win the job, but I thought he could push Gunner because he's got really good physical tools. But coming out of high school, Puglisi was just not nearly as polished as Jared Curtis is right now at the same stage in development. He was kind of, I don't want to say late to football, but football did not become a serious thing for him until later on in his high school career. But he progressed. Sophomore, junior, senior. By the time he got out of high school, senior year, he looked much better. His junior tape was good. His senior tape was much better. And that was really encouraging for me. So I will say with Puglisi coming out of high school, there was more room for him to grow. But even though I think that Puglisi has better physical tools than Gunner does, I still think that Curtis has better physical tools than Puglisi. So it's like Curtis, Puglisi, Gunner, in terms of just like raw physical tools. There's more to playing quarterback than just the physical tools. The list of quarterbacks that were elite athletes and elite arms that didn't quite turn out to be any good is long. Joe Milton, right? But if you're talking about just like projecting them based on what you see on tape coming out of high school, I would certainly put Jared Curtis ahead of Puglisi. I think Puglisi has a good arm, just not quite as good as Jared Curtis. I think he's a good athlete, just not quite as good of an athlete as Jared Curtis. I think he has some improvisational ability, more so than Gunner does, but just not quite to the level of Jared Curtis. So I like Puglisi. He'll have a couple years on Curtis when he gets here, so that could be an edge, kind of like you see with Gunner Stockton having a couple years on Puglisi. That's giving him an edge. So, hey, Puglisi might not be the guy post-Gunner Stockton. He might very well. I'm high on him. I think he's a good quarterback, and that the extra time he has in the system might be too much for Curtis to overcome. But if they were coming out of high school the same year, Curtis is a better prospect, all right? He's a better prospect. They were, if all things are equal, coming out of high school. That's how I would look at that. And then another guy that we did not land, but another highly touted five-star guy that we did almost land, that we had for a long time, that was also in that 2024 class, is Dylan Raiola. And we all know the story. Committed to Georgia last second. Nebraska comes in with a big offer, goes to Nebraska. Okay, we all know that. Our family moves to Georgia, moves to Gwinnett County, moves to Buford, 45-ish minutes away from Athens, and then decides he's going to go to Nebraska, of all places, right? But number 7 overall player in the 247 composite, number 2 quarterback when it was all said and done, was number 1 for a while, but ended up being number 2. Raiola, going back and watching that tape again, it was I was only watching it a year ago. You're reminded how good of an arm, the arm talent that Raiola has. Like, elite physical tools, really, really strong arm, really, really good ball placement, right up there, if not maybe better than Curtis in terms of what you saw when he was at Buford, okay? But again, you've got to remember, when you're watching the tape, if you're watching the Buford tape, you're comparing a senior Dylan Raiola to a sophomore Jared Curtis. I am eager to get my eyes on Jared Curtis as a senior and compare what he looks like as a senior to what Dylan Raiola looked like as a senior. But physical tools, both really strong arms, both really good ball placement. Where I do think that Curtis has an edge is where he's had an edge on a lot of these guys. He's a much better athlete. I mean, I'm sure you saw the social media stuff with Dylan Raiola last year, right? Like the weight, dude. The freshman 15 is putting it lightly for Dylan Raiola. And he's a goodish athlete. He's not a statue back there. He's just not the athlete that Jared Curtis is. And they're similar size. So Raiola coming out of high school is 6'3", 230. Curtis, depending on what service you look at, 6'3", 6'4", about anywhere between 230, 240 in that range, right? So physically the frame is similar, but watch the tape. I do think that Curtis moves better. And I also think that he has, again, like it's the improvisational stuff, the throwing off platform. And it's funny when you talk about Raiola, because like you've seen this guy, like he is straight up like it's cosplay. It's Patrick Mahomes cosplay. That's what Dylan Raiola is doing. Like he's trying to be Patrick Mahomes. And so he's trying to do the quick little release, different arm angles, and throwing off platform, but it's not as natural for him as it is for Curtis. I think Curtis is better at it. I think he's got more Mahomes in him than the Patrick Mahomes cosplay guy has in him. Personally, that's what I see. I think he's a better athlete. He's in better shape. I think he could probably firm up his body a little bit. Curtis could, but just not quite like Dylan Raiola got a little hefty, we should say there. So no body shaming, just like it's just being objective here. And also, you got to remember that I know that people say, well, hey, Dylan Raiola was doing against the best of the best in the highest classification, say at Georgia, which is much higher caliber football than Jared Curtis is playing in private school in Tennessee. That's true. He is playing better competition, but he's playing at Buford High School. If you know anything about Buford High School, guys, it's a city school. They recruit, okay? So yes, they were playing the Mill Creeks of the world. They were playing really good teams, a much higher level of competition, but their team was freaking stacked. They always had more talent on the field than anyone they were playing against, right? Like you got KJ Bolden out there you're throwing the ball to, okay? So yeah, I know that the level of competition was higher. Like I said earlier in the week with Curtis, I recognize he plays in private school, and that's something you consider, but he's also throwing to private school receivers that are being guarded by private school DBs, so there's not much separation there. So I don't put as much stock into that. But yeah, I think coming out of high school, those guys are very similar. I'm talking about splitting hairs. Coming out of high school, I would, again, call me a homer if you want, I would give Curtis the ever so slight edge over Raiola coming out of high school. I think that he's just a better overall athlete than Raiola is. And Raiola has good ball placement. I think there's a word we can argue that Curtis might be a touch better there. Might be a touch better. And his arm might be a touch better. They both have elite arms. Very, very similar. But yeah, I would give Curtis a slight edge there. And is that sour grapes? Like, I don't know. Maybe I got something like in my unconscious that's pushing me to say that. But both really good players. I would just personally, my personal preference, I would take Jared Curtis. And then finally, in 2025, Ryan Montgomery, the guy, we didn't get any senior tape from him because he tore his ACL early in his senior year. But I liked Ryan Montgomery coming out of high school out of Findlay in Ohio, number 180 overall, number 14 quarterback prospect in the country. A lot like Puglisi in comparing him to Jared Curtis. I think Montgomery is a good quarterback. I think we forget about him because he didn't play as a senior. But you go back and you watch his junior tape, he's got a good arm. He can place the ball. He's accurate. He's a good athlete. But like Puglisi, good arm, good ball placement, good accuracy, good athlete, just not quite on the same level as Jared Curtis. So I would give Curtis the edge over Montgomery as well. So when you add all that up, I guess what I'm telling you here is that at least in the Kirby Smart era, I think you can make a very strong argument, and I guess that's the argument I'm making here since I went through every single year, that every single recruiting cycle since Kirby Smart's been here and all the quarterbacks that we've recruited and then landed, I would make the argument that coming out of high school, we'll see what happens when you get to college, like reading defenses and how you match the nuances of the position. That's all TBD. We don't know that. But in terms of the physical tools you see on tape, trying to project that to the next level, I would make the argument that Jared Curtis is the best quarterback prospect that Georgia has landed since Kirby Smart got to Athens, Georgia. So that's what I would love to hear your thoughts on, guys. I know a lot of you are going to disagree with me. You're going to call me a homer, and that's fine. It is what it is. You're going to call me a prisoner of the moment. That's fine. But, guys, I watched a lot of tape. I went back and watched the tape of every single one of these prospects to prepare for this, to talk about this today, because I want to give you guys the most comprehensive look at this as I possibly could, because that's what we do. You're diehard fans. You deserve content design for diehard fans. We don't do the surface level stuff here. So I wouldn't watch the tape. Your take might be different than my take. Like two different people can watch the same tape and come to different conclusions. But that is the conclusion that I've come to, that Jared Curtis is the best quarterback prospect that Georgia has landed and recruited in the Kirby Smart era. But with that, guys, I think we're done for now talking about Jared Curtis. I think we've we've squeezed that enough. We've got enough out of that. We'll be back next week. We have another huge recruitment, another 5-star prospect, the number 1 overall prospect in the country in Jackson Cantwell, offensive tackle, left tackle. That would be great to pair with Jared Curse. He'll be committing on Tuesday, so we'll have you covered that. I'll have a prediction for you guys on Monday, so make sure to come back and check for that. But for now, guys, thank you so much for being here. Subscribe, like, comment. Appreciate each and every one of you. But I'm Tyler, and as always, go Dogs!
Man, is there going to be some property destroyed tonight. 26-21. Dogs on top.